Drodzy Państwo, why do we need teachers? Now we have Google. No i w Google wpisałem nazwisko naszego gościa. I co znalazłem? Pierwszy link, który mnie odesłał do naszego znakomitego gościa, to Szkoła Języka Angielskiego w Polsce. Szkoła, która naucza metodą naszego gościa i która informuje, że prawie 50% szkół w Wielkiej Brytanii wykorzystuje tę metodę i u nas w Polsce także wiele instytucji, podkreślę, także korzysta z tej metody szybkiego nauczania języka. Później oczywiście Wikipedia informująca szeroko o tym, że to znakomity autorytet, psycholog znany na całym świecie, gość specjalny wielu konferencji. Cieszymy się, że także jako doradca rządu brytyjskiego, członek Royal Society of Arts, nasz gość zgodził się przyjechać tutaj do Gdańska i spotkać się z nami. Panie i Panowie, powitajmy serdecznie Colin Rose. Wielkie brawa.
Thank you for coming back. It's always a mistake, I think, to let people out of the room. My best venue ever was in a prison, because they couldn't get away. Okay, well, why do we need teachers now we've got Google? I think the answer to that question is that when you type a question into Google, you get a factual answer. Now, to me, that indicates something important, and that is the question comes first, and the question is probably the most important thing. But what Google doesn't tell you is what do you do when you've got the answer? How do you interpret that answer? And I want to give you first an example, because I want to cover a little bit about innovation, about teaching entrepreneurship, and teaching, above all, teaching students how to be better at the process of learning. Because students will have different academic abilities, but absolutely every single student can become better at learning and thinking if they're taught those skills. But I want to start with something that happened to me in 1985, and it illustrates the power of an inspirational teacher. Because in 1985, I was reading the New England Journal of Medicine. Okay? I'm not a doctor, but my teacher, my inspirational teacher, taught me how to read scientific publications and how to interpret them. And this particular issue stimulated an idea in my mind of a product. And I developed that product. I sold the idea to a Japanese company who produced this product, and they sold $2 billion worth of that product. Okay, they only gave me a small percentage, but that's enabled me to be a full-time educator. I like to think of education like a kind of, it's a bit like an iceberg. At the top, well, let me say that when information is essentially free, and it's a click of a mouse away, we've got to change how we view education, what it's for. Now, we're learning about, say, science, but we should be learning some fundamental skills at the same time, and that's what I'm doing with education. I'm trying to encourage and show teachers how to teach these skills, these underlying skills that are absolutely critical for the century we're in. So we may be learning about science, but we should be learning to be curious, persistent, to be able to do research, to experiment, to analyze, to work in teams and to reflect. And it's these skills, and particularly, I think, the skill of curiosity, that is at the heart of being an entrepreneur and coping with the modern society. So in other words, what I'm begging for is to move from a model of teaching of information to a model of teaching which is far more developed to teaching skills. And this is a reasonable definition of creativity. It's the person who basically discovered vitamin C. I would give you his name, but I can't pronounce it. To see what everyone else has seen, but to think what nobody else has thought is a pretty good definition of creativity. And another comment here from Bernard Baruch. Millions saw the apple fall, but it was only Newton who really said, why? So, I think the skill of asking questions is a fundamental skill which we should be developing in our schools. And entrepreneurship, and I want to touch on that, to develop these skills, is basically, I think, a combination of creativity with business knowledge. This is a guy called Izzy Rabi. Now, he got the Nobel Prize for physics quite a few years ago. And somebody asked him, they said, Izzy, at the Nobel Prize ceremony, how did you become such an effective scientist? And he said, it all goes back to my mother. And every day when I came back from school, she would say, Izzy, did you ask a good question today? Not did you answer a question, did you ask a good question? Now I guess in the average schoolroom, probably the teacher will ask 40 questions a day. I would imagine the average student asks one question a month. And usually that's, can I go to the toilet? And I think if we can change that balance, that curiosity, that drive to know, to start with the question, leading to the answer, that's the motivation, then we'll do a good job in education. Sorry. Yeah, okay. So, did you ask a good question? And that's led me to think about how we train teachers to train students how to ask the right questions. He also went on to say, incidentally, I think physicists are the Peter Pans of the human race. They never grow up, and they keep their curiosity. I think that's what we've been talking about. We have to keep that curiosity. That's what drives innovation, and we can only cope with the speed of change if we are curious and we are learning continuously. The quality of a student's learning depends on the quality of their thinking. I think that's reasonable. In which case we should teach them how to think in a logical manner and think creatively. It's also true that the quality of their lives depends on the quality of their thinking, all the way from their relationships to their jobs. So how would we build students' interrogation powers? It's one of the things I've been sort of thinking about and trying to develop. Well, the professor of education at Chicago, some time ago now, a man called Benjamin Bloom, and if you're in education, you probably know it's called Bloom's taxonomy. And he developed this sort of ladder of thinking, which goes from the basics, which is the ability to describe, to remember, in steps, to be able to understand, to analyze, and to apply, and finally to be able to evaluate and create something. So if we're going to develop entrepreneurs, we have to be at the top of this ladder. It's not just good enough to regurgitate information. So based upon that, and based upon Izzy Rabi's life quote, we developed a program called Did They Ask a Good Question Today? And it's a program for teachers and for students simultaneously to teach them skills of learning, skills of thinking, skills of being innovative. And I won't go through all these questions, but the very simple answer, which I think is a contribution, is to have on the wall of every classroom a series of questions. And whenever a subject is being discussed in the classroom, the teacher refers to that question poster and says, which of these questions do we need to ask if we are truly to understand this particular subject? So they, over time, day by day, week by week, they're building up the understanding that I have to interrogate a question, a subject. I have to interrogate the subject if I'm truly to understand it. So it's kind of a ladder of sophisticated questions. And the two that I think are probably the most important is, if this is true, that what we've been learning, what else must be true? And what's the implication? And it was that last question, what is the implication of this, which my teacher drummed into me, my inspirational teacher 50 years ago, that led me to the innovation, the new product that I developed, which changed my life. Okay, now, one of the other things that this conference is talking about is, how do we develop entrepreneurs? How do we develop students first who will eventually be able to invent products and take advantage of this tsunami of information that's available to us? Because I think you can define the internet, basically, it's kind of distributed intelligence. That's why the world is moving so quickly, because a few years ago, when I was growing up at school, the transmission of knowledge would be maybe take days, weeks, whatever. Now it's hours. And I think everybody's got a part to play, and there's four things effectively that I think that every parent should do, and certainly in primary schools we should do. We should teach students the power of setting down written goals and the steps to achieve them. How do you plan to achieve success? We should teach financial literacy, the impact of interest rates, compound interest rates. We should make sure like kids have bank accounts. We should give pocket money for jobs achieved. We should also, I think it's really important if you want to be an entrepreneur, because you're going to fail, probably 50% of the time. We should teach that failure is just feedback, and what did you learn from it? And one of the things that I did with my children as they were growing up, we also had this idea of an effort coupon. So what we would do, if they really tried hard at something, they didn't get a reward for final achievement, they got a reward for the process of effort towards that aim. And finally, independence, and I would say this to my kids as they grow up, you want it, you earn it, you do something for it. Okay, let me also now give you an idea of how we tackle the teaching of an entrepreneurship in a secondary school that I'm involved in. It was very simple, but it ended up being extremely successful. It was about age 16, 17. And it took about 15, well, what we developed was a course over 15 hours, but you'll see they spent a lot longer on it. And what we did, we divided the class into two teams. So there was Team A and Team B, and we gave them a task. They had a company, and the objective was to research and create a business, right? It had to be an online business. It could be a physical business, in which case they would use eBay to buy and sell the product, or it could be a digital business, didn't matter. We then gave everybody a role. Every student took a role. So there was, in each of the teams, there was a chief officer. His job was to create a business plan and to create the bid for any funds they needed. There was a finance officer, there was market research, design, production, advertising, marketing, sales, video production, whatever. These are 17-year-olds. Each member would research, and this was critical, his own speciality. So, for example, the research was, what business should we be in? So they started with that basic premise. They then created a business plan. They applied for funding. We said there would be a sum of money available, but you had to pay it back, right? You had to pay it back at the end. So if they failed, it came out of their own money. If they made a profit, they kept the profit. They had to research the source of supply. They had to produce a website. Of course, there were templates for that. Members would research copywriting. How do you write advertising copy? Pricing, web marketing. One of the people I remember very vividly, she was an absolute whiz. I mean, this is a 16, 17-year-old girl, and she was researching web marketing, using Google, using YouTube, social media and everything. Absolutely fantastic. And financial control. So over a period of time, they developed a business. They actually sold real product. We didn't tell them how to do it, like you were saying. Never told them how to do it, just got on with it. And they were assessed at the end, the team, on who made the most profit. Well, it developed critical thinking, it developed creativity, it created planning skills and leadership. And I will say one other thing in a minute. We said it was a 15-hour course over a period of a term. They spent 50 hours on this, right? So the motivation was phenomenal. Now I want to add another element now, because I want to deal with the new technology and what it can do and why it is so important. And for those of you who are not, say, familiar with what a learning platform does, and you were talking about you using a learning platform, it isn't what it's not what it is, it's what you can do with it. And I'll give you an example in a classroom. Now this classroom, each student had a tablet. Okay? And the teacher is able to take material from the internet or from their interactive whiteboard and send it to each individual student's tablet. And that's okay, that's basically what you would do in school normally. But now something else. During the class, the actual classroom, in real time, the teacher is able to send a question out to the student to assess the level of understanding of either each student individually or students as a whole. And that can be displayed, if you want, in a graph during the class. This is real time. So I'm sending a question or a couple of questions out, and I can see which of you have understood where everybody is at. And based upon that answer, then I can send a task, maybe a homework task, out to the students, which can be differentiated depending upon the level of understanding. So the students who are ahead can be given more challenging work. The students who are not yet fully understood it, they can be helped and supported by me as the teacher one-to-one. It's differentiated learning. The students can submit their answers either in writing, conventionally, or they can hit this button here and they can send it as a multimedia answer. They can send it as a video answer or an audio answer. The teacher can send her guide as to what to do to improve on what you're doing in writing or as an audio comment or a video comment. Again, she just hits her button on her tablet. And this is using, it's called a learning platform. Then the teacher can obviously now send supplementary material to each student's tablets depending on where they are. More challenging to keep them more able, motivated, or to support the less able students or the ones that haven't yet got it. The students can share their ideas together via the network, in the class, or frankly, as you were saying, anywhere in the world. They could be collaborating anywhere. So what we're talking about in using the technology is anytime, anywhere, personalized learning. Now that's a game changer. That really is changing the base, because that's what every teacher wants. Every teacher wants to be able to personalize the learning so that it's relevant to that student, to support that student wherever they are, to make sure they succeed. Now the interesting thing is when we created this business challenge to teach, if you like, entrepreneurship on the basis of business, I said I created a 15-hour course. They spent 50 hours on this course because they wanted to. It was fun. It was experiential. It wasn't something that wasn't a case history from Harvard. They actually created a business of their own. And I know from feedback they said it was one of the most fun things that they ever did. So, what I'm talking about, or what I suggest needs to happen, is that we need to change the role of the teacher in the age of Google. Do we need teachers? Absolutely. But we need teachers to do what Google can't do, to inspire, to motivate, to support. And here is, if you like, my definition of what teaching now should be. Teach them how to be independent, effective, questioning, creative, self-managing learners. That's the role of teachers in the age of Google. And why is that important? Well, it's pretty obvious, because now we need to outlearn, outthink, out-innovate our global competitors. I was relatively recently in China, and we think of China as a low-cost competitor. Well, yeah, up to a point, but the money they're pouring into education is unbelievable. There are more Chinese students in the top 1% of IQ than there are people in Poland. Okay. So this is big time competition. So they need these skills: critical thinking, problem solving, collaboration, etc. They need the 21st century skills, and that's what we need to move education towards. I mean, frankly, all of our presenters are saying the same thing. We just have to move to teaching skills. Well, we have a bit of a clue as to specifically how to do that. Because one of my educational heroes is a guy called John Hattie. You may be familiar with him, but basically he did this amazing meta study. He analyzed the top teaching strategies in the world and learning strategies. There's 50,000 studies and 200 million students. So there's no argument that this is a large-scale, valid piece of research. And he was able to quantify what were the top 10 learning strategies. So in other words, no mystery, no cottage industry. This is exactly what you need to do to make students more effective. Here it is. Now, I'm not going to go through it, except to say two things. He calculated what's called an effect size. In other words, how effective are these teaching strategies? And a 1.0 effect size means a 30% gain in student achievement. Wow. One of them alone was a 1.0 effect size. And that was teaching students how to be able to evaluate their own work. That was the single most important learning and teaching strategy. So what we have done, we have taken, for those of you who don't read English, it's self-reported grades is number one, formative assessment, in other words, teachers giving feedback as to how they are doing and what to do to improve, was number two. Students teaching students was the number 3 top learning strategy. Thinking and learning skill training. Space provision, which is basically meaning, revising. You teach something to somebody today, and then tomorrow I give you the key points, the next week I give you the key points, the next month I give you the key points, etc. Anyway, this afternoon is not the time to go through these in detail. Enough to say that what we then did is we then took these top 10 learning strategies and we said, wouldn't it be fantastic if we were able to teach students the top 10 learning strategies and teach teachers how to embed these learning strategies into the class day by day, every week, so that at the end of the process, these students are good learners. They're good at the process of learning. They're inspired by learning. They're motivated by learning. And that's what we did. I think this is the two twin things you have to do. You have to teach students directly how to be good learners, and you have to teach the teachers how to embed those skills into the learning place. And if you're interested, at the end, outside there's a desk outside, there's a leaflet about it. It's called the Digital School Academy. And it goes back to this thing is, yes, the technology is fantastic, the technology is a game changer, but at the end of the day, we're still using, 100,000-year-old brains to do the learning with, so it's the brains that have to be changed, not the technology. And I'll leave you with this quotation, and it says, if we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's students, we rob them of tomorrow. Now that quote was from John Dewey, who's a very famous educator, and he said that in 1910. So, please So thank you very much indeed. I think that technology is fantastic, it is a game changer, but at the end of the day, the thing we have to do is we have to teach our students how to be good at learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much.